Have you ever heard of the Great Emu War?
It was a national tragedy.
Great Emu War. That rings a bell somewhere.
No, I haven't, and I'd be interested to know about it.
In 1914, war broke out. Australia was enlisted as an ally, large numbers of Australian soldiers were sent to the front line and many lives were lost. The Allied powers came into victory in late 1918. This was the beginning of the world's descent into economic struggle. In the late 1920s, Australia's economy was suffering from a large drop in wheat and wool prices and were being outmatched by other countries. This resulted in a struggle for the farmers to keep pace with the current economic state while trying to provide for their own families.
My mother and father, of course, worked in the boot trade, and of course that just went in the Depression. But my mother managed to get 2 days a week for work, which meant, you know, we had a little bit coming in, and we all moved in with my grandmother, who had a big house in Regent. Mother and father and myself moved in, and also my 3 aunts. So it was a big house and accommodated them because nobody had any work.
Other effects included hundreds of thousands of Australian citizens had lost their jobs, suicide rates increased, and national income declined. This forced the farmers to make the tough decision of feeding their families or paying back the government.
We had friends too that had houses, you know, in loans, of course, but they just couldn't pay them. They just packed up and just walked out. And of course the banks took over the houses.
Following World War I, a large quantity of ex-Australian soldiers struggled to find a sustainable source of income to support themselves or their families.
My grandmother, she had ducks and chickens, and of course up there at the time there was no houses, only the big houses, you know, and old places. And she had ducks and chooks, and of course she sold that. We could all of us could pluck and clean chooks and ducks and whatsoever. She sold those to the butchers and that, and well, they had big plum trees and that, and she used to sell all the plums. When the plums were ripe, she'd sell all those to the greengrocer. They come and strip the trees and that. And we had a water well too in those days. It had a well as well, so we, you know, she had plenty of water for that, and she grew her own vegetables, and Mum helped and that, but we weren't too worthy of. But the 2 days a week, of course, Mum had got, that helped. We were getting a little bit of money in to the house.
And with the Great Depression looming just around the corner, something had to be done to support these men. Due to the drop in wool and wheat prices, the government had fallen into a large debt that they were unable to recover from. What the Australian government had decided on was to give more than 5,000 veterans money and land in the Australian Barren West. And with these promises, these men had taken on a new life as farmers, with a large majority growing wheat. What these men didn't anticipate was a horde of 20,000 emus that would destroy their property and demolish their crops. This was the start of what has now been named the Great Emu War.
Native wildlife might come in on cropping areas and destroy the crops, not only by eating them but by trampling it down. And the reason, I guess, for that is because their habitat is limited, and so now they're having to come into those areas to get feed. But also, by providing more water, these populations breed up. So you quite often find that when these conservation societies take on big land holdings, the first thing they'll do is destroy the dams or fence them. Because if the animals have access to water, then they populate more.
This horde of large flightless native birds had only been searching for water before unknowingly stumbling upon these vast quantity of wheat crops.
Having said that, maybe those on the Eyre and York Peninsula do go to the coast. There's a lot of emus inland as well, through Broken Hill, on the way up to Broken Hill. So I'm not really sure about their habit of going to the coast after breeding, but certainly they're not going to get close to the coast in Adelaide.
On October 11th, 1932, Sir George Pearce, Minister for Defence and Senator for Western Australia, approved the military's use of machine guns against the invading emus, but failed to notify the military board of the attack. Over the following weeks, soldiers were deployed to begin their attack on the emu horde. The first shot was fired on the 2nd of November by Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran. It was quickly apparent that long-range attacks were quite ineffective against the large birds, as only 80 birds were killed during the first attack. The soldiers tried numerous forms of attack, including ambush attacks and using truck-mounted artillery. Ambush attacks proved to be somewhat effective, whereas the mounted artillery was useless due to the uneven terrain. On November 9th, the soldiers withdrew from the campaign because the military board sent an urgent telegram to Western Australia to cease fire. On the same day, Prime Minister Joseph Lyons was found defending the actions of the Defence Minister. After the campaign ended, it was discovered that the State Agricultural Department also knew nothing of the attack on the birds. 3 days after the end of the first campaign, the soldiers were redeployed and the second campaign began. The second campaign fared better than the first. The emus became desperate for water, therefore acted more reckless in their attempts to quench their thirst. This made it slightly easier for the soldiers to kill the emus.
The biggest lakes in the country were temporary. 6 years out of every 10 they'd been bone dry. So whenever water comes up, native animals skyrocket. All your crows skyrocket, your cockies, your kangaroos, your emus, all of it, wombats, possums, koalas. And because the white people brought along all this agricultural means, all these hydroponics, all this fun stuff, suddenly water was everywhere. Food was everywhere. So it made sense for them to come into these big units because they could justify doing that. Whereas prior to that, they didn't have enough resources to support more than 10 in a flock.
Almost 1 month later, on the 10th of December, the army is recalled for a second time. There was no third attempt at bringing the emu migration to a halt. The number of confirmed kills sits at 986 after 9,860 bullets were fired. This averages to 10 rounds of ammunition per confirmed kill, although it is unsure how many emus were killed in total, because many emus would eventually succumb to their wounds after disappearing into the bush.
All of them will sleep, but one will half sleep. He'll be in a daze, his brain will be functioning but still in that sleep-like state. The moment this emu spots any activity, he'll wake up the rest and they sprint. That's the same kind of behaviour they saw during that war, but they completely ignored it prior to investing in the bullets. So that's their loss, not the emus.
After weeks of failed attempts, the government realised that it cost them more to continue funding the farmers with more material than how much damage the emus were causing, and as a result surrendered to the native birds.